This is The Storied Outdoors, a podcast somewhere between Lewis and Tolkien and Lewis and Clark, finding clarity in the stories we tell and the adventures that shape us.
Welcome to The Storied Outdoors. I'm Bryan Gill, along with my buddy and co-host, and the faint sound of a leaf blower in the background, Brad Hill. Today we have a special guest that is known by many of our listeners as Dr. Redeye, Matt Lewis. Matt is a scientist who works in the field of genetics. He is the leading voice and expert on the Alabama native species of Redeye bass. Dr. Lewis literally wrote the book on fly fishing for Redeye bass. I've known Matt for about 5 years, ever since he and Jonathan Kelley founded the Redeye Bass Slam here in Alabama, which has gotten a lot of traction lately. So we're going to get into more about that in a minute, but welcome to The Storied Outdoors, Matt.
Thanks, guys. Pleasure to be here.
Yeah, man, so glad to have you. Matt, first of all, we didn't talk about it earlier. Where do you work? What do you do now?
So right now I'm a postdoctoral fellow at Auburn University. So okay. I'm basically finishing up some stuff that I didn't have time to get to during my dissertation. Nice. That needs to get out. And while I'm doing that, I'm also kind of trying to figure out where I want to, end up. Like, start applying to faculty jobs, different universities, and just see what's out there.
That's great, man.
Yeah.
You're on campus there at Auburn now.
Correct.
Awesome, man. That's great.
What a great place to learn. I mean, they've got such a great fisheries department, and I graduated from Auburn, and it's a good school.
Yeah, that's great. Well, I mean, Bryan said it, you literally wrote the book on Redeye bass. So can you just walk us through, how did you arrive at that, of all the fish species in Alabama, which there are a lot, why that one? And, tell us about that work. What does that look like for you?
Sure. Yeah. So I probably need to back up a little bit to why I even wrote the book, like how I arrived on that species. So at the time I was working in Birmingham at UAB, and I was in the neurology department there, and just very high pace, high stress job. And my downtime was just go fish somewhere. I mean, my boss and I even had an arrangement where, she was like, I like you, if I can get you at 100% for 4 days a week versus 70% for 5 days a week, like that's fine. Whatever you need to do that fifth day to, relieve stress, whatever. So I would go fish.
That's a good boss right there.
I tell you, I mean, it was a really nice setup. And so I would go fish for redeye bass. And the way I arrived at redeye bass originally is that when I first started fly fishing, what really spoke to me were backcountry brook trout. So I really enjoyed getting away from other people, getting out there, camping out 3, 4, 5 miles from trail access, and just being alone. And I enjoyed the experience more. I felt like the water was all mine. There's no anxiety of, well, this guy's catching fish and I'm not, or whatever. And just the things you see when you're away from those more populated areas, more wildlife, bug life, things like that. And I was spending a lot of time driving to the Smoky Mountains to do that. And somebody mentioned to me, I believe it was Josh Tidwell, that first said, you need to fish for redeye bass. And of course, like most people in Alabama, what is that? And, I started looking into it, and, he's like, hey, I've got a creek here, I guarantee you for the first 100 yards, you'll catch one. So I went and fished, and I think it was like the first 150, 200 yards before I finally caught one. So I felt a little bad that I didn't do it when I was supposed to do it. But when I caught that fish and just looking at it and the colors that you're not used to seeing on bass, it just completely captivated me. And I, immediately wanted to devour anything I could about this species. Like where all do they live? What have other people caught these? Why there's got to be more out there. And I just couldn't find anything. There was very few articles, and mostly those were buried into random fly fishing magazines over the last decade or two. So you'd have to order a back issue to be able to read that article. And even the scientific literature is very limited on these species. Typically, they're buried down into state reports or theses and dissertations, or behind a paywall with academic journals. So I started, getting all this information, all this data about these fish, and trying to better understand them for myself. And then I thought, well, if I'm interested, maybe someone else is interested. So the information that I had, I thought was enough to, start kind of compiling, and fast forward to years of me fishing for them, and kind of getting my own experience and, contributions to the information that I had. I just decided to write a book, and I thought, I have no idea how to do this. I have no idea if anybody was going to buy this. But if for nothing else, for myself, I want to get all this information into one location, just to have. And so, the deeper I dug, the more I realized that, there's just, the state doesn't know a lot about these fish. I mean, they've just kind of flown under the radar. And in many cases, maybe that's, can be a good thing sometimes. But, I'd say bass in general have been largely understudied. So we've got, so many endemic bass species, from the different redeye, shoal bass, Swanee bass, Choctaw bass, all this stuff. And we know nothing about it because we're just on the cusp of learning about them. And, most of the research on bass, in the scientific community has been, how to get bigger bass in Paw Paw's farm pond, or how to get bigger bass on whatever reservoir, so Bassmasters will come here instead of there. And, you're managing for size, not species or species diversity. And so you're seeing that shift now. And as we've made that shift, what we've learned are that, for instance, shoal bass in Alabama have been extirpated, and it happened without us even knowing, because nobody was looking. We just knew they were there, and then we knew they weren't there. And, that's one example. And then you look at redeye bass and some of these other systems in Georgia and South Carolina, and they're disappearing because of introductions of Alabama bass, which are non-native to those. And so they're hybridizing, and every year there's fewer and fewer pure redeye bass. And to that point, those state agencies don't know what the end result's going to be. I mean, they're kind of just watching it unfold with very limited resources to do anything about it. And so I started thinking, well, if we don't know anything about these populations in Alabama, how can we manage them? How do we even know there aren't problems here? And so, the book kind of came to light at that same time. So it was, I wanted to educate people on the importance of the fish, the uniqueness of the fish, but also, make it a fly fishing book, because people aren't going to buy just like,
a science book.
Right. So, I kind of melded the two. So it's really kind of a conservation book disguised as a fly fishing book.
Brilliant.
Yeah.
And so I pulled one over on a lot of people.
Matt, that's so fascinating that you say that about going for size. I mean, I grew up fishing. Just been fishing my whole life. It wasn't until probably my 30s that I realized there were different species of fish I was catching. I thought everything was a largemouth if it wasn't a smallmouth.
Exactly.
And then if I caught a small one, oh, that's just a female. or that's a male, and you're catching the females out of the big bellied ones. And I think about that. I'm like, how many different species did I catch before I even knew there were different species?
Yeah.
I mean, and I'm an Alabama native. I mean, I grew up here and fishing and
on Lake Eufaula.
On Lake Eufaula, I'm like, goodness gracious. Yeah, we are ignorant, not in a stupid sense, but just ignorant of not knowing the information.
Yeah, and I'm in the same boat. I mean, I grew up in South Alabama where Choctaw bass are native. I've caught them before, and we just called them spotted bass. We didn't know. Um, And I think that's the case for a lot of these species because some of them do have a very limited range. And so just by nature, they're not going to be as well known. And again, like, science is just discovering some of these. So there's so much we don't know about them. So it's exciting because in the bass world, at least, this is kind of the frontier. We're just now learning what we have and where we have it. And then as we're doing that, we're also learning, some problems with non-native introductions and things like that. And I think in general, people just think that bass are ubiquitous, They're interchangeable, largemouth, spotted, whatever. Those are the two main bass, smallmouth, spotted, largemouth. Those are the three that everybody knows about. But there's actually a lot more. And some of them are kind of cryptic because they may look a lot like, one of those three more commonly known species. And so I think that just getting information out there, that there are different species of bass. Some of them have small ranges, and some of them have some serious issues because of that, whether it's habitat loss or, habitat disturbance or non-native introduction. So specifically zooming back in on Redeye, we've, through my work here at Auburn, we've determined there's actually some pretty serious conservation threats with these fish in Alabama, specifically the Cahaba and the black warrior species of redeye bass. And what we know is that they're hybridizing with Alabama bass at a pretty high rate, higher than you would expect, higher than it exists between two other native bass species in the literature currently. And so the question is, well, what are we seeing? Is this natural? Is this, human induced? What's going on? And so the preliminary data that we have suggests that it's disturbance based, so that things like sedimentation due to poor construction practices or development, all those things lead to turbidity, which changes the habitat of that specific stream segment or stream. And then you've got, things like pollution from all the industry, coal mining, effluent, things that have historically been around the Birmingham area where the black warrior and Cahaba are located. And so we've been able to kind of correlate instances of hybridization with disturbance. And so what we're really trying to hone in on now is, okay, so what specifically is facilitating hybridization between these two native fish? And I think that's going to be a really interesting thing as we move forward with trying to manage these populations of redeye bass, is understanding how we can prevent hybridization if we're the ones that are causing it. If we're not, then what does that mean? And how do we protect these refuge populations of, genetically pure redeye bass that are left? So there's a lot of interesting work that's, kind of still going on, but, we have no idea how long it's been going on because, again, these fish have kind of existed in streams that no one knew about.
That's incredible.
Well, we have it's kind of a hard question to answer. And Brad, I'm going to skip ahead to a question on our list. It's what can people do to help this? It seems like a problem that we really don't know what the cause of the problem is, but do you see a solution?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot of things or a few things that people could do. So one of the things I think it's a good idea for everybody that's, that recreates on water is to get involved with a Riverkeeper, whether that's Coosa Riverkeeper, Cahaba, Black Warrior, all of them. These groups do a lot of work, whether it's monitoring for pollution and, sedimentation that's being deposited into the creeks or rivers. They're kind of the front lines, groups that are really protecting the quality of the water, whether that's drinking quality, swimming quality, fish habitat quality. They're kind of the ones boots on the ground checking on things. And most of them are donor funded. And so they really rely on, donations to do what they do. And so you can support them by donating. All of them have events to kind of gather like-minded folks and raise money. So you can attend those events. So that's one thing I think that everybody can do. The other thing is, Native Fish Coalition has a chapter in Alabama now.
And tell us about your involvement on that. You're on that board, aren't you?
Yeah. So I started the Alabama chapter of Native Fish Coalition just because there was a lot of parallels with what they were doing with brook trout up in the Northeast to what we want to do with redeye bass in the South. Their issues up there are different because we're dealing with there are hatchery produced rainbow trout, brown trout stocked on top of native brook trout streams. And so what you have are, these brook trout populations that are displaced by hybridization, you name it. A strong foundation up there for being a voice for native fish. While brook trout kind of is how they got their start, we're quick to tell people that organization, it's not an angling organization, it's a native fish organization. And so we brought, given the diversity of species and the different challenges and issues that we've really been around of educational signage with different partner organizations for tri-spot darter. What do we do? And it's escaping the name right now, the vermilion darter in Turkey Creek. And we have, a whole host of projects kind of in the now with different species of darters, spring pygmy sunfish, anything we can do to help bolster the awareness of native fish in Alabama and help protect those native fish and their habitat in Alabama. That's kind of what we focus on. And so I stepped aside as the state chair recently because I had been kind of bumped up to the national vice chair for Native Fish Coalition. And so my job with that kind of has expanded to include the South in general. And so I kind of help start new chapters in the South, support those chapters, but still am involved as a board member on the Alabama board so that I can, keep this momentum going and keep working to help protect native fish here.
You mentioned the film festival, the International Fly Fishing Film Festival, which is, me and Bryan were noticing their logo, and it looked like there was a little redeye bass in some of the artwork. So I thought that was pretty cool. And so you see things like that, and so it seems like Alabama fly fishing is growing. And what are some benefits and some ways that you see it growing, since you've been doing
it? So I think we had a pretty solid foundation with folks that have been doing this a long time. So, Rob Rogers at Deep South, Frank Roden in Rainbow City, the Jacksons at Riverside Fly Shop. I mean, they've been building and contributing to the sport in Alabama for years. And I think they're uniquely equipped to handle the growth of the sport in the different, sectors of the state. But I think that aside from those kind of taller than life figures, there's people scattered all over the state that are fly fishermen or have been for years. So there's, people in North Alabama, there's people in Central Alabama, there's people in South Alabama and Eastern Alabama. And I think what's changed is those groups used to be kind of insular, maybe not on purpose, but they just didn't know the others existed. And so what's happened, I think, in the last few years with, the Redeye movement, these fly fishing film tour events, these people have now started to meet one another. And so what you have is like all these separate groups that fly fish in Alabama coming together and knowing one another. And so you're seeing kind of a more singular fly fishing Alabama group. Guides are meeting each other, guides are popping up. Rod builders, fly tires, are getting discovered by each other, but also by people that are new to the sport. And I just think that now, instead of people going into, say Rob's shop in Birmingham and at Deep South Outfitters and getting outfitted for this, yearly trip to Belize, or we're going to Montana on vacation or whatever. You've got people like, hey, how do I fish the Cahaba? Mm-hmm. How do I fish the Tallapoosa? And I think that a lot of the work that we've done to help grow fly fishing in Alabama has really played into that, and kind of unifying the masses and the different cliques and things like that to really have the fly fishing community in Alabama. And it's pretty exciting to see. And I think that my book has contributed to that.
100%.
But I also think that, the larger movement, the Redeye Slam, as we've already mentioned with Jonathan, that we started, I mean, that was huge. You've got East Alabama fly fishing, Stephen Rockerts on the Cahaba, smallmouth anglers up north, Wade Blevins, which I know you've talked to him, yep. Brandon Bells, Corey Hendrick with fly tying, rod building with Blue Water Rod Company, and now, Calico rods. And so, I mean, that's
a rich
really
community.
Cool to see it grow. Yeah. And everybody's, how can we help one another? And so
that's the feeling that I've gotten too, Matt. It's like all those guys that you just mentioned, I would say that, they're buddies, I mean, mm-hmm. we're friends with, most of the guys. I haven't, is it Stephen Cook with Calico? I've not met him, but I've got several friends of friends with him. And I mean, but that whole community is just such a welcoming and open community that it's really, I feel like that's part of it too. It's this community that everybody owns and everybody's a part of and everybody's supporting, and we do stand on the shoulders of giants like, Rob and those other guys that you mentioned around the state. Mm-hmm. One day people will say that about you and, the work that you've done.
Maybe they'll be like, oh man, this guy ruined red eye fishing. Who knows? But
it all started with that book.
Yeah.
This guy.
If I could pick one thing that ruined it. No, I think you're right. I mean, there's so many people that, come in to the sport that are new, that talk about how welcoming the fly fishing community here is. And I think it's because everybody has, kind of the same goals. Like, we want to see fly fishing grow. We want to see fly fishing have a voice in the state. It's not just, Bassmaster Classics on Lake Guntersville. It's not just crappie fishermen. It's not just the saltwater group that we don't hear a lot about. There's another group of anglers in Alabama, and those are fly anglers, and I think that we're growing. And I think the exciting thing is not only are we growing, but we're growing in the right way. Fly fishing by nature typically is more associated with conservation and willingness to be involved with conservation. So you're not just creating people that want to consume the resource. You're creating anglers that want to be stewards of the resource. And I think that's a really important distinction and a really sustainable way to grow. And so that's exciting to see.
Well, that's good to hear, because, that's my next question was, what is the one need that we would have in the state to both grow, but also be conservationists? Like, what does that look like? How can we, I know you mentioned this, the individual river keepers and all that, but what's that one need that that we could do, or that we could help to fill that gap as listeners?
That's a good question. It's one that I think about a lot because, there's always a fine line between, um, creating awareness for something versus exploiting something.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and so I think that, Alabama is already a fishing destination.
Right.
As I mentioned, even though it's primarily largemouth bass or those mean Coosa River spots, which are actually Alabama bass. Um, those are the main things that people come to target bass wise. And then you get into crappie and other things that people like to fish for. But I think the key for fly fishermen is that most of those other anglers that I mentioned are primarily on the lakes. I mean, that's where
Right.
they spend the majority of their time. And so we've got all these rivers and streams, I mean, thousands and thousands of miles that need love, that need people to know that they're there, but people to respect them, not something to drive your Jeep through or somewhere to deposit your beer cans, and not just a swimming hole, or tires, which is pretty common as well. But to really understand, the rivers for how natural they are, which is, quote unquote natural these days. There's so much modification. But, a place that people can go enjoy, understand the biodiversity, the sights and sounds that you experience on these waterways that you're not going to get on a lake. I think that's the key, is to kind of get people excited about fishing on moving water, streams, rivers. And that's going to be, I think that's going to be able to handle some of the growth, because it's going to pull some away from the lakes and reservoirs. And I just don't think it's going to be, I don't think there's a way you can overfish it, at least not the way the current regulations and things are set up. They monitor that. They know what the populations of bass and crappie and things like that are, and that's how they set the bag limits. They know, how many can be taken, and not everybody that's fishing for them are taking them. So
yeah,
I think Alabama can handle it. It's just doing it in the right way.
Well, that's encouraging.
Yeah. So as you dig deeper into the species, and you talked about its colors, and just seeing it and seeing the places, how has that impacted you, and how has it impacted perhaps your beliefs, or we often will say, how can somebody believe this is, this all just happened, right? When you see a creature like that. So what does that look like for you, and how has it impacted you?
Yeah. It's deeper than that for me. Just because I like to take a step back. Science in general is, it's often in conflict with religion. Mm-hmm. And most scientists actually are professing atheists. And that's something I've had to deal with, being a Christian in science now for the past 15 years or so. You're constantly like, how are you a Christian if you're a scientist, and, all that kind of stuff. And so, I think that me personally, so I'm into Reformed theology, and, that kind of theology is very cerebral. And so it kind of speaks to me as a scientist, as an academic. And I've always enjoyed that. So like the apologetics and things like that. But, the more I learn about science, and I'm talking like a cellular level, the millions of pathways that have to happen for us to breathe, and all the molecules that have to be made in order for us to be able to do those things. It's just amazing. I mean, you cannot deny that there has to be, you know, a design to all that. I don't think it can happen by chance, that people like to say, or by, evolution, at least on a macro sense. And all the checks and balances that exist at the molecular level to ensure that those molecules function the way they're supposed to function. And if they don't, there's a backup plan, It's, just the detail that you learn about. And so then zooming back out, looking at it on an organismal level, I can look at a redeye bass and just think about, like, how did that color on that fin get made, and why did it get made? We don't know currently. But I guarantee you it's genetic, at least at some level.
Yeah,
and it's
those
just,
Brian and I talk about the spawning colors of those
yeah,
bass. I mean, it is unbelievable.
There's nothing like it.
I've only seen photos. I haven't seen it yet. So my hope is to get up there during spawning and actually see one myself. But the photos are staggering. The color of those fish.
I mean, the color of the fish, and then you step away from the fish itself and you look at the place where they live.
Mm-hmm.
Those rivers and streams with the rock and the clear water, some of the flowers, native plants, and things like that. And you're looking at a habitat at that point. So then you think about, wow, this fish has been designed to live in this spot, better than fish. And how and why and what, so you just think about all those things. You just really you can't help but to just kind of stand back in awe and just be amazed that that it exists. And so for me, that's a lot of, redeye bass have taken me to all sorts of places like that, that I never knew existed. And I think that it's something to be proud of. It's something that we can take pride in Alabama, that we have really good populations of multiple species of redeye bass. And it just kind of helps me appreciate where we live, in a whole new level. But also, again, that I think we have to be stewards of that.
Yeah.
And so it's a good reminder, and it's something I think about a good bit when I'm out there.
Matt, I think I've heard you say that the redeye is kind of like the Alabama brook trout.
Mm-hmm.
And they live in very similar ecosystems, very similar habitats. They're very colorful. I love that idea of, I've traveled up to Tennessee, North Carolina, chasing brook trout. But Brad and I have also traveled into some really beautiful places here in Alabama to find these redeye bass. And when I'm around those places, I am in awe also of the beauty, and that to me is like very. It's I don't know. It's one of those kind of situations where I find myself praising God more for, man, this is something He created, and it is so beautiful. Are there times like that when you're in the outdoors, and are there ways that you experience God in the outdoors?
Yeah, I mean, I think that, aside from just the visual beauty, and like, man, I'm thankful that I get to do this. I'm thankful that this exists. You've got I think the peace and quiet that's out there. So it gives you a chance to kind of ponder on things and reflect on things. And, oftentimes when I'm fishing, it's, and you guys probably can relate to this, as a parent, when I'm away from my kids, I miss my kids. I feel like I should be with my kids. But when I'm with my kids, sometimes I just need to get away and get peace and quiet. So I'm never happy, fully complete either way. And I can't wait till they get older so I can take them with me, because then that'll be different. But right now, when I'm out there, I'm thinking about, how can I be a better father? How can I be a better husband? My wife is just a saint for letting me go do these things while she's at home with both kids. so I think about all those things. I think about, how lucky I am to be able to be a father, to be a husband. And so it usually results in me thinking a lot more about my family, and how much I can't wait to introduce my kids to this when they get older and explain to them, God's creation through the lens of Redeye Bass, which it's helped me see the world in a different way. I mean, before Redeye Bass, I did not, even being a scientist, did not really appreciate, ecology,
Mm-hmm.
or the biodiversity even that we have in Alabama, and how all those things are related, and how much our impact has changed those things. And it just helped me to have a more holistic approach for, some of the different ecosystems that we have in Alabama, and the uniqueness of those. And all of that was through, Redeye Bass. And so it was like Pandora's box for me. And I hope that it is for other people. That's part of the goal with growing Redeye Bass awareness, people fishing for them, is that they'll have those same experiences. And I have dozens of people that have written me, messaged me, whatever, telling me how much my book has changed their outlook on fishing in Alabama, how much it's helped them discover a cool fish they didn't know existed, and how much they appreciate that fish now. What can they do to help? It's just, way more people have been impacted by it than I thought ever would. And it's always encouraging for me to see what I wanted to happen actually be the way that the book is interpreted and accepted, and it's having the impact that I wanted it to have. So it's been exciting.
Brad, I think you're still on mute, buddy.
I certainly can, definitely resonate with that. I just recently, long story, but I just recently came into possession of a boat and starting to spend some time out on the marsh down here, going after redfish with a fly rod, and we were out there this last Friday, and it was just so quiet, out there in the middle of that marsh, and the wind was blowing, and you're watching, little small crabs needle through the grass. They call it marsh hens and little birds out there. There's just all this whole world of an ecosystem rolling out there. And, we came up on this massive, I mean, if I'd had a cast net, I could have caught 200 mullet. It looked like there was just this huge group of mullet that were just feeding and fishing and rolling over. I was like, well, I'm gonna throw my little shrimp pattern up through there and pull it through there and see if one hits it. Who knows? Because I'd never seen that many at one time. So like you get to see so many things, when you're in places like that, and it certainly does, draw my eyes upward to go, my goodness, God, look what you have made, look what you have created, and we get to enjoy it. We get to enjoy it. It's really, really, really cool.
Sounds like we need to go fish with Brad.
I got a lot to learn.
I was thinking
got a lot to learn yet, but come on, we'll figure some stuff out together.
Hey, I think we could take some of those Corey Kendrick shrimp patterns down.
That's right.
Damage.
Yeah. No, I think it's important to mention too that I mentioned the Redeye Bass was kind of my lens into understanding like conservation and ecosystem level appreciation, and then you start learning how much we have messed up things with poor development practices. I mean, whatever, you name it. There's a ton of things out there. And there's a really good Aldo Leopold quote that really resonates with me. And it's, what is it? It's one of the penalties of an ecological education is that one lives alone in a world of wounds. And it's like if you don't understand all those things or take the time to understand those things, you don't even know what's going on. But then once you do understand it and you start seeing all the different issues that we've created, I think one of the goals of the Redeye Bass movement, when Jonathan and I first sat down discussing it, was we want people to fish for them because that is the gateway. Like, that's how you get in. But we want them to also understand, how unique those fish are, how important they are, how fragile the streams are where they live, understand the issues that are facing them, whether it's habitat loss or hybridization or whatever, and know that, that's some of these species we may lose, we may not, but I mean, there's legitimate concerns about those black warrior and Cahaba redeye bass species, especially the black warrior. And so we want to create an understanding that's both educational and conservation minded as people pursue these fish. And so that's something I think about a lot is, what's our impact? What does that look like? And I know that's something that, we talked a little bit about with Alabama becoming a fly fishing destination. And I think a lot of people are coming to catch redeye bass. I mean, that's something that we've seen grow. And you can quantify that pretty easily by just looking at Instagram. And, before my book, there was, a couple hundred hashtag redeye bass or whatever. And now there's thousands.
How many of those are hybrids though?
Well, I don't want to, people get, disappointed when I crush their hopes. I try not to do that as much anymore.
I love it.
But no, when I wrote the book, before I released the book, and even now continually as this grows, I have conversations with people, how do we avoid loving something too much?
Yeah.
And how do we keep the movement going in the right direction? Because I think right now it has been very positive growth. It's been people that are genuinely respectful of the fish and just want to experience it and want to experience the places that they live. And we laugh because I was talking to a guy just the other day, and he made the comment that, how many people in jean shorts and sneakers have just completely trotted through all these creeks and rivers with beetle spins, before it was a thing, and kept a stringer or two or however many, of these fish, and they're still here.
Yeah.
So I don't think right now that anglers are the issue. I think that what we're dealing with more on a broad sense is more the habitat loss or habitat disturbance and introduction of non-native species. And so that's really why we kind of try to target anglers. I mean, these user groups are already there. There's no secrets anymore. What's going to happen if we don't take a proactive approach and shed, light on this species in a positive and a respectful and a conservation type way, is somebody's going to come along as an influencer or whatever and just blow it up. And then there's no balance to the story there. It's just, this is fun to fish for, and have at it, boys. So what we want to do is we want to try through this to change overall the way we view our resources in Alabama, from being just consumptive users of a resource to conservationists, or at least being more knowledgeable of conservation.
Yeah.
And I think that, when I talk to people, older than me, several generations older, fishing is strictly a food source. When I tell them about redeye bass, the first question is, are they good to eat? And I'm always like, I don't know, but that's not why I fish for, and changing people's idea of complaining about fisheries because I'm not catching my limit or I'm not catching the big ones, or, you know, how do we change the narrative from, you know, size and numbers to what should be here, what's native, what's, you know, special experiences, things like that. And you're not going to do that with everybody. I mean, there's just people that care nothing about catching tiny fish. And that's fine. But again, like I mentioned earlier, there's also a fine line between, you know, awareness and exploitation, and how do you navigate those two things? And so my goal always with Redeye Bass was to create thoughtful and ethical awareness, you know, educate people on what the fish is, why it's important, how you can catch them, but don't give specific locations. So you'll notice my book, there's no like park here, go here, this stream, this whatever. It's like the Coosa River system, the Tallapoosa River system, because that was my way to educate folks of the fish and create awareness for the fish, but also not give out a roadmap to exploitation, basically.
There's a lot of there's a lot of wisdom in that, and I think that it's almost more rewarding to find those fish on your own. You know,
right?
And you know, we've had guides help us to kind of identify these places, but you know, when you go out on your own and you've learned from these guides on what to look for, what are these places, what are the habitats, where do you cast, and you find one on your own, man, that's where a really rewarding trip is at right there, rather than just doing something else somebody else did.
Right. Yeah. And I think I've said this before too, and I didn't invent this. Other people say this all the time. You only protect what you love. And if you don't know something, you can't love it. Mm. And so if we can get people to understand these places, experience these places, fall in love with these places, then they're going to want to protect them. Now, that's bigger than Redeye Bass. And realistically, that's the whole goal, is by protecting the places they live, you are protecting Redeye Bass. Mm. And so we want to help people love it in an impactful way. So our audience has always been anglers. You know, it's kind of a narrow audience because anglers have done a lot of damage to fisheries. So moving non-native species around and things like that. And then specifically fly anglers, because again, I've mentioned they're, you know, very tuned into conservation, mostly catch and release. So these are kind of narrow approaches with our, you know, specific message or platform or whatever, to inform those that already care about fisheries or could benefit from more knowledge so that they care more. And I think these are going to be the people that are going to be most effective in creating change, you know, down the road. And so, you know, there's that standpoint. There's people that, like me, think that you can do more by, you know, educating certain user groups to create awareness and hopefully conservation. And there's people that are gatekeepers, you know, that are like, I don't want anyone to know where this is. I wish that no one knew about Redeye Bass so that I could just enjoy it. And I think that, you know, if people want to do that, that's fine. But I don't think you're helping the resource. You know, you're still being a consumptive user of the resource. You're taking, but you're not giving anything back. Right. And like I mentioned, you know, in today's world with the internet and Instagram and everything else, there's no secrets. I mean, you know, over the last few years, people have done YouTube videos and Instagram stories and videos and, you know, very identifiable landmarks and things like that. And it only takes that one time for someone to be like, aha, I know where you were, and go there. And it could be someone that wants to go catch a stringer for dinner, and on a small stream with as slow as Redeye bass grow, that could be detrimental. And so I think that, you know, you gotta do something, because if you do nothing, they're going to go the way of the shoal bass and they're going to be gone, because some of them are already on that trajectory. But you also can't, you know, just keep it a secret, because that's, you know, nothing's going to happen. So I think that we can do more by getting the word out in a thoughtful way, and, you know, give people a greater appreciation, understanding of the fish. Not, you know, how do I catch my limit? How do I cook them? You know, I think outdoors are kind of getting away from hook and bullet in general into more of a thoughtful pursuit of whatever game or species.
Yeah.
And so hopefully this education eventually, creates more awareness that will drive research, and hopefully that research will help drive better, information for management and policy to help these fish down the road. And I think that this is just one species or group of species, really. So I think this same model can be applied and amplified in Alabama to help a lot of different things. Red-eye bass is not the only fish that's here that you can fly fish for. It's just the most fun to me. I mean, I'm biased, but there's a lot more that we can do here. And so I do have people occasionally that message me, and how do you create awareness but also avoid exploitation, and how do you deal with those two things in your own mind? And I just tell them, I don't know that what we're doing is the right way to do it. I'm always willing to take a step back and look at our approach and rethink things, or consider other thoughts or opinions or whatever. But I know that what we're doing is making a difference. And it's making a difference in the minds of people that, pursue these fish. Other people are noticing. I mean, the state is noticing that they're having an increase in red-eye bass anglers. They've funded projects, what I did for my dissertation, because of some of that renewed interest. So, I mean, it's hard to argue that you're making a difference. You got to keep making sure that the trajectory goes in a positive way and not in a negative way. And I think people that are just, out there to be a consumptive user, and keep it a secret, obviously doesn't have the best of the resource in mind. So, I could go on a soapbox on that for days and days and days, but I just think you can't sit by idly and do nothing. And so,
but Matt, maybe this could be opening up like a can of worms that maybe we don't have time for. But I hear, I guess this has drawn me to think about, as believers, as Christians, historically, a lot of Christians, sort of dog, or I want to say, I hear this term every now and then, like they sort of poo-poo on conservation, or like taking care of the, of creation, taking care of the environment. That would probably be the word, the sort of the buzzword of, they're an environmentalist, you're a scientist, they're on their side and we're on this side. But man, like as stewards, like we were called to be stewards of creation. Like, shouldn't that play for us at least, shouldn't that play a part in driving us to maintain this balance that you're talking about? What do you think? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, no, I think so. I mean, I agree. I mean, that's something I've, mentioned already a couple of times, that I feel like we are to be stewards of these resources that we have. And, I think there's, whether that's wild turkeys or deer or red-eye bass, I mean, I think that, we have an ethical, what's the word I'm looking for?
Obligation.
I would go so far.
Obligation. Yes.
Obligation. I would go so far as a God-given call to.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Giving you this to take care of this thing.
Right.
I've created this for you to enjoy, for you to steward, and for you to manage. And like, man, how can you not take that serious? Especially when you're in those beautiful places. You're like, I don't want this to go away.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
It's so beautiful.
Yeah. I mean, I agree 100%. I mean, I think that we, like the word I was looking for, obligation, whether that's spiritual, ethical, I think those can be intertwined, really, if you're a believer. And, we can't just sit back and see what happens. I mean, I think we have to be active. We have to be voices for these resources that we cherish, because if we're not, like, if I'd spend as much time as I do on a red-eye bass stream and no one knew about it, I didn't say anything about it, then who's going to,
Yeah.
you know, I mean, I kind of feel a responsibility, to an extent. And so, you know, I think other people need to feel that responsibility, because it's not mine.
Yeah.
I enjoy it, but there's so many other people that do. And,
well, and it's not that hard, right? I mean, pick up your
no,
trash. Keep your
exactly.
keep your hands wet when you're touching the fish. Be gentle with their mouth, you know.
Right.
Just simple things. Don't, you know, just don't be stupid on the water and, you know, move the rocks around and, you know, things like that. I mean, just
Dude, I laugh so hard at those videos of those guys kicking over those like the balance rocks. Have you ever seen any of those online? They'll find like where the people have like balanced those stones, and you know, I'm not really sure the purpose behind that, but they'll like go kick them over. It just cracks me up because I think that's what my son would. That's what my son would love to do, not for any other reason other than to just knock it over.
Just knock it over.
I do that all the time when I come across them. I mean, I just kick, and sometimes, you know, it's like, I shouldn't have kicked that hard. Those are rocks that hurt. But
those
are
that's changing the habitat, right? I mean, that's
exactly. Yeah, because it takes habitat, I mean, essentially out of the stream that are used by insects. Where now, you know, of 9,000 rocks in that stream, is 8,990 going to make a difference? Probably not. It's the principle of the matter. And so I had a really kind of a heated exchange on Instagram a while back when I posted a picture of me kicking over one of those cairns.
I think I saw that. I think that's what I'm remembering.
And this guy was like, well, if we really want to be, you know, specific about not messing with the habitat, we wouldn't be sticking hooks in their mouths or whatever. And I'm like, okay, you know, it's like, it's not all or nothing, you know, it's, you can participate in those things in a way where you're not necessarily doing harm to the fish, or at least not, you know, not killing the fish.
Right.
And not ruin the habitat in the process, you know? So I just hate that outlook.
There's I can't remember. There's a friend of mine that Dave Kakish, who's been on the podcast before. And I usually give him credit because I can't remember if he cited if it was a Spurgeon or if it was a Calvin or somebody, but it was somebody that he read, I think. But I come across it all the time in life, period, not just theologically, but just in situations like this. It's like the proverbial drunk man on a horse. If you're too far one way or the other, you're going to be laying on the ground, right? So
right.
We have to strike this balance, you know, like if you really, you know, wanted to make an impact, you wouldn't put hooks in their mouths. Well, I wouldn't get to enjoy seeing these beautiful creations if I didn't, or I'd have to snorkel in 2 feet of water.
Oh, absolutely. And to be even more, you know, specific, I mean, you look at what hunters and anglers have done for conservation. Absolutely. I mean, they are the backbone of conservation in the United States. I mean, they are who funds the work that we've done to restore populations or better understand populations. And I think a lot of people don't realize that. They think that they're just here and like we've had no part in it. And it's like, yeah, we've ruined some things, then we've had to bring some things back, and hunters and anglers are mostly responsible for doing that. It's not.
That's right.
Well, that's why I don't bat one eye about having to pay for a fishing license or a trout tag. Right. I mean, that's helping conservation.
That's right.
Absolutely. Yep.
Matt, you've mentioned a couple of times your you know, a previous book that you've already written, but you've got something new coming out. Is that right?
Correct. Yep. So
tell us about that.
Yeah. So even actually before I wrote my Redeye book, I had kind of been tooling around with the idea of writing a book about fly fishing in Alabama. And, you know, I wanted to obviously start more localized for my first book because I didn't know what I was doing. And so I kind of put that aside, did the Redeye thing, and then, you know, kind of went back to it as soon as I published the Redeye book, and kind of been writing on it off and on for years. And really just the last 2 years, I reached out to Stackpole Books. It's, you know, same as Lions Press, and they're all kind of under the same umbrella publisher. And I pitched the idea because I had also pitched my Redeye book to them, and they basically, with the Redeye book, were like, "Hey, this is great, it's well written, but this is such a niche within a niche. Like, I don't know that we can sell it." And I'm like, "Yeah, I don't know either." And so it's great that that book has been so successful because I was able to kind of leverage that book's success into getting this deal. And so, I sent them a manuscript kind of as it was written, obviously with a lot of gaps and holes. And they wanted sales figures for all the, Redeye books. And
I bet that was a
so
shocking number for them. You sold
yeah,
how many of those?
I think so. And I think that, the fact that I did it all myself,
yeah,
self-publishing, self-promoting, all that, I think turned some heads. And so I think the exciting thing with that is, so after like 2 years of emailing back and forth, waiting 6 months for a reply, whatever, I finally got a reply that and the guy was just so nonchalant about it, like, "Hey, this got the green light today, so I need your address," and blah, blah. I'm like, whoa, wait, say that again. It got the what now? And I emailed him back. I'm like, "Wait, so just so I'm clear, you're telling me that like this is going to happen?" And he
awesome.
he was like, "Yeah," and I'm like, "Okay, all right," And so now it's new for me because I'm having to deal with a publisher, and there's things that maybe they want to do and things that I want to do, and anyway, so that's all kind of fun. But so the book is going to be kind of a fly fishing guide to Alabama. I've been giving Stephen Rockerts a hard time because I always wanted the title to be Fly Fishing Alabama, and he stole that without. I mean, to be fair to him, he had no idea. And so I've got to come up with a different title. But it's going to be a guide to fly fishing in Alabama, and it's going to be freshwater. It's going to be saltwater. So I'm going to be spending some time down there on the coast, Brad.
I know a guy with a boat.
Yeah. So I've got to go down there and cover, all the different saltwater species and inshore, offshore, near shore, surf. I mean, everything. And then I've got a pretty good pulse on finger on the pulse of freshwater fishing, but there's still some gaps that I haven't personally done that I'm going to need to reach out to some folks that are maybe, subject matter experts or whatever. And so what I want it to be is, this beautiful community of anglers that we've built in Alabama, I want to meet with and talk with as many people as possible, both, that have been doing it for years, like Rob and, some of those folks, as well as some of the new people that are just doing great things. I mean, Brandon Bells with his fly tying and things like that. And so it's really going to be a history of fly fishing in Alabama. It's going to be without GPS locations or specific spots, kind of a guide to fly fishing Alabama. I'd love to put in little footnotes with like breweries and barbecue joints and things like that to kind of
that's awesome.
Supplement the experience when you're fly fishing around. But yeah, so it's I think it's due in June of 2024. So I've got a little time to get it written and finalized. But I would imagine it would probably be out in early 2025, maybe. I mean, that changes constantly, but
that's going to be a fun couple of years of research.
Right. I don't know that my wife, she was excited that like this is happening and all this kind of stuff. And I don't think she thought through long enough to realize what that means. So I'm going to be going on quite a few, fishing trips, research trips, sampling trips, as I like to call them.
Yeah. If you need anybody to take notes, I can scribe for you.
So this is my note taker. This is my photographer. We've got our entourage that travel around and do these things.
I tell you what, man, that would be a fun addition to that book is like, some real great photography, brought into that. Cause that's part of the, right. That's part of the lure. That's part of the enjoyment of what we do is the beauty of fly fishing and the beauty, capturing that beauty would be cool.
And I've got, several friends that are really good professional photographers that have already, as soon as I talked about it, they were like, "Hey, I want to, take some pictures." And I'm like, "Hey," because I mean, it's beneficial for them to have, their stuff in a book that's published, and it's beneficial to me because it would help the quality of the book. And so, I've got a lot of images that I can use that are my own, but I'm also really wanting to reach out to other folks. Again, I want to include as many people as I can in this process because I don't know everything about fly fishing, and I never will. I don't know everything about Alabama. I don't know everything about fly fishing in Alabama. So I need to lean on some other people to kind of make a project like this happen.
That's great, man.
What a treasure that's going to be.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, we don't have that.
Mm-mm.
So
no, I'm really looking forward to it, man. And yeah, that's cool.
Matt,
down here, there's a new little fly shop down in Daphne. The Lost Angler is what it's called.
Mm-hmm.
Check those guys out. And he would.
I know Pete from back in the day of the forums.
Yeah.
Online. And so I bought one of his shirts probably back in 2008 or 9, something like that. That was like a Lost Angler logo shirt. And that was before he even, had the fly shop or any idea of probably having one. He was building canoes or something then, but,
no, it's coming together, man. He's doing a good job down here.
He's on my list of people to talk to for sure.
Yeah, he'd be great.
Well, Matt, last question we like to ask our guests is, what's your next adventure? Do you have any fishing trips coming up?
Sample
trips? A lot. So, things are busier now because I'm not a student, which is a little bit more laid back, lifestyle where I can just not show up to work one day and go fish or whatever. Now I'm, an employee. And so I've got to be a little bit more strategic in how I take time away from work. But I do, I'll have to start this spring on taking some trips around the state. And so I've already, probably the first one will be in March, doing some striper fishing on the Coosa River. And then after that, I'll probably be making quite a few trips down to the coast. I really want to get the saltwater stuff filled out a little bit better just because I've got so much freshwater material already. I really need to kind of fill in some gaps with the saltwater. And I've fished so much, fly fish so much for saltwater species outside of Alabama, Louisiana, Florida. And so, it's not going to be drastically different, but I still need to do it in Alabama, and talk to those people that do it often, fly patterns, techniques, all those things, and some species that I haven't ever fished for before, with a fly rod. So
very cool.
That's what's next.
Super exciting, man. I can't wait to see that come together. I mean, because Alabama is one of the most diverse fisheries, certainly in our country. And I've always I live a stone's throw from the Delta. My house is, as the crow flies, probably only 2 miles from the heart, from the Delta, and surrounded by boat launches. And I'm thankful to, I just got this boat, and there's just so much water to explore, and so from brackish and saltwater all the way up into the Delta and the freshwater. I mean, there is just unbelievable amounts of fish to discover and to see. And man, so everybody's like, "You fly fish down here?" I'm like, "Yeah, all the time."
There ain't no trout down there.
Yeah, I know. That's like my favorite thing to hear. Trout in there?
You catch that with fly rod? Yeah, I mean, even if you've seen any of the things, even next to my office, there's a ditch. That's a drainage ditch. It's on the map. It's Bolton Branch, but it's a ditch. It's got trash and stuff in it, but it's packed full of little, all kinds of brim species and bass in there. And I'll walk over there into the ditch, and I'm sure they're driving by going, "What's that boy doing down there, waving that fishing rod around like that?"
Well, and on the same token, that's also daunting because I can't cover it all. And so there's going to have to be some decisions made of
that means there's a volume 2. So.
Yeah, hey, there you go. Yeah, second edition.
That's right.
But yeah, Alabama has so much water, and
Absolutely.
trying to figure out how to, you got to kind of group things. And so I've been really struggling with, like, do I do like rivers and streams and then lakes, or do I do just like Coosa River and then incorporate all the streams and reservoirs within that system? It's like there's so many different ways you could do it. And a lot of times I just sit there and stare at the blinking cursor and I'm like, all right, so it's been 30 minutes. What am I doing here?
It's just taunting you.
Yeah. And so it's going to be a fun project, but it's going to be a hard project too. And so also while trying to, do a postdoc and get a real job somewhere, and, 2 small kids. So yeah, I mean, it's going to be a whirlwind, but it
sounds like a great adventure.
Going to be fun. Yeah,
absolutely. So, man, I've enjoyed this conversation, Matt. Man, I really appreciate you taking time to join us. And I feel like there's a lot left on the bone. So we'll certainly circle back around when that book is
absolutely
finish the book, and we'll talk about. I'm sure there'll be some stories that will come from those adventures. I mean, we heard a little bit, because we got to talk to Mary Beth about the film a little bit. She had a couple good stories that involved a U-Haul truck and a 1-lane road. So I'm sure there'll be some stories like that come from all these sampling trips.
Yeah, and I think too, what we with those guys at Dorsal, I mean, they have been phenomenal. Again, amazing fly fishing filmmakers from Alabama, live in Alabama. We never knew. And so now we've gotten connected with them. And I think that there's going to be some piggybacking probably on some book research / film, awesome. Filming going on, hopefully. And so we're excited to kind of continue to work with them. Obviously, Mary Beth included still as well. Because I think our little group it's been really, really fun getting to know one another and kind of forming those new friendships. And so definitely look for more from our little group as well.
That's so exciting. Well, what are as far as what you do, what are ways our listeners can follow your work and follow? I mean, with Instagram, do you have a website? Those kinds of things.
I don't have a website yet. I've owned a URL for 8 years now, waiting for a website. I just haven't done it. So the best way is on Instagram. So Redeye Bass Fly Fishing on Instagram. You can also, all the other organizations we've talked about, Native Fish Coalition, Coosa Riverkeeper, Cahaba Riverkeeper, all those people have Instagram accounts. So you can follow all of them. And so that's probably the best way to get in touch with me. It's just me that, kind of manages that account. So if you message me, I'll be the one to respond. And
yeah, we'll make sure to have all of that in our show notes, and of course on our website on thestoredoutdoors.com, where people can see more and be able to connect more with these things, and then they'll be able to hopefully be a part of some of those things. Maybe they could be a part of what we talked about, the solution of coming alongside and helping.
Yeah.
So that's phenomenal. I hope this conversation does what it's already done for me today. It's just been such an encouraging conversation to hear about, the state of fly fishing in Alabama. I knew it was growing, but just to hear all these people coming together, working together, that are friends and not in competition, but have this kind of goal in mind. That's so exciting. As somebody that's been fly fishing for a pretty good while, I started in college on the Chickasaw Bug behind the University of Mobile when I was a student there. And I thought it would be really cool to learn how to fly fish. I knew no one that did it, and all I did was I had some VHS tapes that that somebody had given me, and that I figured out how to do it by feeling, by those videos, and everybody was like, "What you do? What?" And so to see what it's become now is just so encouraging, because it is a sport that I know Bryan and I both dearly love, and there's a artfulness to it, there's a thoughtfulness to it, and it does provide us a lot of opportunity to what you said earlier, and that's take time to reflect on life. How do I be a better dad? How can I be a better husband? How can I appreciate what God has given us in this moment? So it has definitely been a canvas for that. So that's one of the many reasons that I love fly fishing. So thank you for sharing all of those things and sharing your story with us, man. I really appreciate it. We like we always say, and I just said, I'm so encouraged. I hope this story encourages everybody. I hope people go and follow you, Matt, on Redeye Bass Fishing in Alabama on your Instagram and support these efforts. And this conversation has been rich and good, and may hope it challenges somebody maybe that's not a fly fisherman to go learn how to fly fish, and maybe for those that are fly fishermen to get out there and find the time to get out there and experience some adventure, go find some new species even, and write some stories down and share some adventures in what we love to call the storied outdoors.
If you've enjoyed this podcast, please take some time to leave us a review, or better yet, share it with a friend. We hope these stories encourage you to write your own stories and share your own adventures in the storied outdoors.